Hello AP Econ students, it's Miss Kelly here. These are your notes for the week of April 6th, and it's going to cover Unit 1 and Unit 2 of macroeconomics. So economics is all about choices, and the reason why we have to make choices is because of this word called scarcity. And the reason why we have scarcity is because we have unlimited wants and we have a limited amount of resources. Another fundamental that you need to know is the circular flow. With the circular flow, you're going to see that we have one side are the business side. And businesses buy resources and they sell products. So the resources are the workers. So they buy workers and sell goods. The next topic is households. So households are going to buy products and they're going to sell resources. They're going to sell their work. I'm sure you do remember our first graph ever. That is the PPC, Production Possibility Curve. This is going to tell you the production possibility of one country producing two types of goods. So I'm going to go ahead and draw out the PPC. Go ahead and draw an increasing PPC and pause the video. An increasing PPC means that there's an increase in opportunity cost. On your axes are two different types of goods. So the first thing we're going to talk about is unemployment. If you're not using all of your resources efficiently, you're going to be anywhere inside of the curve. So point A is when we are not using them efficiently, unemployment. Point B and point C are along the curve. That means we are using all of our resources efficiently. Point B or point C, no point is better than the other unless a country prefers one good over the other, but all of them are efficient on the curve. And then we also have a point D that's outside, that is unattainable at this time. We can get out there if we shift the PPC. So shifts of the PPC are going to be based on technology and resources. So if we have more resources, you can see a PPC shift out to the right. That would be our new PPC. But remember, that does not mean that more people are just working. Because if you are moving for, like say for example, there's a lot of unemployment and more people start working, that would just be a point from A onto the actual full employment curve. So that line represents full employment. If it's going to be a shift, there has to be more amount of resources, so more workers added to our country. Let's go ahead and take a look at how the PPC shows us opportunity costs. All right, I want you to take a look at the graph I just drew, and I want you to try to calculate. Go ahead and pause the video and try to calculate what is the opportunity cost for this country to move from one computer, and they decide they want to make two computers. What is their opportunity cost? Go ahead and pause the video. All right, the opportunity cost is going to be 15 trains. Now how we calculate that is this. You look at, if you go from one computer, you are making 35 trains. If you decide you want to make one more computer, now you can only make 20 trains. So 35 minus 20 gives you 15. That is the opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is what you're giving up, the next best alternative. In order to determine what type of economy that you have, you got to see who answers the three economic questions. Those are what to produce, how to produce, and for whom. There's different types of economies. The two main ones we're going to look at is first the market economy, and consumers and producers answer those questions. What am I going to produce, how to produce, and for whom? Basically, the market is going to determine that. And then there is the command economy. So command economy, the government makes the decision of what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. And then there is the mixed economy. The United States is best characterized by a mixed economy. Yes, we do operate in a market economy, but we do have government intervention. So we do have government and we do have the consumers and producers that answer those questions. So we are a mixed economy. In a market economy, we can have private property, things like this. Command economy is more like a communist government. Now we're going to look at the factors of production. So that is land, any of the resources that are used. Labor, that's the workers. And then capital are the machines or the equipment used to produce goods. But also underneath capital, you have human capital. That's the education. So when people go back to school, learn a higher trade on there, they are going to be considered human capital on there because they are getting a better education. The most important concept of macroeconomics is GDP. GDP is the gross domestic product. It is the calculation of the final goods and services produced in a country's border. So it has to be made here in America in a given year. The components of GDP are C, consumer spending, I, investments, G, government spending, and NX, net exports. So take a look at this in case you need to copy this down. Again, C is consumer spending, I is investments, that's talking about like buying factories, government spending, that does not include transfer payments, which we'll get to, and then net exports are exports minus imports. What is not included in GDP? Any used goods, okay? Illegal activity like drugs. Transfer payments. Transfer payments are basically when the government gives you money. That's one example. For example, Social Security. So elderly receive Social Security. It's just being transferred from the government's hands to another person's hands. It is not counted in GDP because it does not, they're not producing a good, they're not producing a service. They're just transferring the money. So it's not counted in GDP. Remember that GDP on our SRAS and our AD curves, GDP is a component of AD. AD is the C plus I plus G plus NX. Our next topic is going to be unemployment. First off, you need to know the definition of the labor force. So the labor force is very, very important. That is made up of the unemployed and the employed. And then you have the LFPR. That is the labor force participation rate. In order to calculate that, you have to do the labor force divided by the population times 100. The next calculation is the unemployment rate. The unemployment rate is the number of unemployed divided by the labor force times 100. But remember, to be considered unemployed, you have to be looking for a job. So people that give up looking for a job are considered discouraged workers. That's why the unemployment rate might be skewed, because if they've given up, they're not considered unemployed, but there's a lot of people that aren't working. Types of unemployment. So the types of unemployment. First one we're going to talk about is structural. That is when your job is obsolete, is no longer needed, and you don't have the skills to do a different job at that time. Next one is going to be frictional. Example of these are going to be college students trying to get their first job then. Stay-at-home moms, so say for example they plan on going back to work, so it'd be considered frictionally unemployed. You do have an intention to go ahead and get a different job later down the road, or a job later down the road. Next one is going to be cyclical. An example of cyclical unemployment is when we are going through a recession. So if we're in a recession and people have lost their jobs because the economy is doing bad, that is cyclical. The last one is seasonal, and that one's easy to remember. It's basically based on the season. So Santa doesn't have a job in July. Our next topic is price indexes. Price indexes measure basically how our prices have changed over time. Obviously, money, the worth of the amount of money back in the 1950s has definitely changed nowadays. we really look at the CPI. That is the Consumer Price Index. And what that does is measures the goods that most consumers buy. So, for example, I'm going to give you a chart here to take a look at. All right, I wanted you to take a couple seconds to take a look at this chart. So a CPI, again, is looking at the goods that consumers buy. For example, in this one, it's milk, jeans, and phones. And I put the quantity that they went ahead and bought, so that's going to be 2, 2, 2. I just made these easy numbers. And so then we look at the prices. Like in 1990, the price of everything was $1. In 1991, the price was $2. So we're going to take a look at the price changes. The first thing you're going to do is calculate the nominal GDP for that. So you're going to multiply the quantity times the price. Let's just say, for example, we're doing 1990. The quantity of each times the price, and then add them up. So that would be 2 plus 2 plus 2. So that would give us a total of 246. For 1991, you would multiply the quantity, the 2, times the price of 1991. So that's going to be 4 plus 4 plus 4, which is going to give us 12. If we wanted to find the price changes, we do final minus original over original times 100. So that would be 12 minus 6 over 6 times 100. So that simplifies down to 6 over 6, which is 1 times 100. So we see the prices rose by 100%. You may be given charts that go ahead and give you the quantity of each year and the prices of each year. If you want to find real GDP using that type of chart, you would do the quantity of the current year times the price of the base year. So all the prices in the base year. So quantity of current times price of the base will give you the real GDP. Now remember, real GDP is adjusted for inflation. You will need to know that formula: nominal minus inflation equals real. That is very important. You can use this for output. You can use this for just taking a look at what the changes are. Wages. So I'm going to give you an example of the wage. Let's say the worker's wage changed from $10 to move to $12. They got a raise. Let's also say that inflation was 5%. And if they asked us what the real wage was, how do we calculate this? You're going to first look at this. We don't have a percentage here. We need to find the percentage first. So remember, that's final minus original over original times 100. So that's going to be 2 over 10 times 100, which is going to give us 20%. So their wages increased by 20%. Inflation was 5%, so minus 5%. Gives us a real wage change of 15%. The last content we need to cover is talking about lenders and borrowers. So I want you to think to yourself, what do lenders like? Do lenders like lower inflation or higher inflation? Lenders like lower inflation, low lenders. Borrowers like high inflation. The reason why borrowers like high inflation is because they're paying back money with dollars that aren't worth as much. The last thing I'm actually going to do is show you just an example of all those graphs that we talked about this last week, just to kind of reference so you don't forget what they look like. Here is the ADAS graph that is in full employment because we are operating where we're at long run aggregate supply is at. And then you have your money graph. Notice that the supply is vertical and demand is downward sloping. Remember, fiscal policies affect the AD curve, and the AD curve in return affects the demand of money. Then we have the supply of money. Say we have a monetary policy that affects the supply of money, which changes interest rates, which then changes investment, and then affects the AD curve. Last two graphs are the loanable funds graph. You're going to see the real interest rate is there. If the government deficit spends, that's going to shift the demand of loanable funds to the right. If people decide they want to save more money, that would go ahead and shift the supply of loanable funds to the right. As well as, for example, if there's a monetary policy that affects the money supply curve, that would also affect the supply of loanable funds. And then we have the Phillips curve. We have inflation and unemployment. The SRPC is inversely related, and the LRPC is vertical. If we're in like a recessionary gap or inflationary gap, it's just a point along the SRPC. If there's expected inflation, we're going to shift the SRPC, and anything that shifts the LRAS or the PPC will shift the LRPC. So that's like technology and resources. Hope you found this video helpful, and I will see you guys on Zoom.